For those of you who work, which is presumably you, work nirvana might be defined as going to the best meeting ever. Because so many of the meetings we attend and hopefully participate in aren't, and by the way, attending and participating aren't the same things, most of those are far from being something you might call the best. And so my guest today has written a fabulous book titled Your Best Meeting Ever. And we're going to talk about how you can make your meetings more productive, more helpful, and so much more. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you make a bigger positive difference in the world, becoming more of who they could become, make a difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live because nearly all of these are first done live. So you could get the information sooner, engage, be a more active part of this process. We'd love you to do that. The way to find out is to join us in one of the two platforms that we stream these on, that being Facebook and LinkedIn. So you can go to you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to join the groups there to find out when these live streams happen, how you can get involved, and just generally get all the inside scoop about the show. If not, you can continue to get it right where you are now. If you like what you're hearing today and you want help in developing the leaders in your organization, let's talk. Reach out to info@kevineikenberry.com and we'll schedule time to learn more about your needs and see if there's a way we can help you and your leaders. With that, enough of the logistical stuff and on to our guest. She has joined me here. And so now let me introduce Rebecca Hinds to you. She's a leading expert on organizational behavior and the future of work. She holds a BS, MS, and PhD, all from Stanford. Go Cardinal. She founded the Work Innovation Lab at Asana and the Work AI Institute at Glean, both first of their kind corporate think tanks dedicated to conducting cutting edge research on the future of work. Her research and insights have appeared in places like the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I could keep going, but you get the idea. She's a trusted advisor to companies navigating the challenges of modern work, from meeting overload and hybrid dysfunction to the messy realities of AI adoption and organizational change. Our focus today is meetings, as you probably knew from the title, and we're going to talk about the insights and ideas from her new book, Your Best Meeting Ever, 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. And isn't that what we want to happen in all of our meetings? Rebecca, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I think this is going to be great.
So let's start here. Meetings. Like everybody has an opinion. You share some interesting thoughts in research about the fact that we don't all hate them, all of them, but we definitely have a love-hate relationship with meetings. And so why is that?
We do, and it errs on the side of hate. We were talking about Bob Sutton on before we became live, and Bob has been a mentor to me over the years. He's done great research on the fact that bad is stronger than good. We know that negative emotions, negative experiences, negative people have a much stronger impact on us than positive ones. And because of that, because not all of our meetings are bad, but there are a lot of bad meetings, those tend to overshadow the good ones. And so much so that we have this visceral negative reaction to meetings. We're socially conditioned to believe that meetings are bad, and yet also an inevitable cost of doing business.
Hopefully we can make it less of a cost and more of a benefit before the end of this conversation. But so I guess in the introduction, I say that there's a lot of things that you work on and help organizations think about. So, but you've chosen to write a book about meetings. Why this book and why now?
For several reasons. And, I start the book with a story from World War II. The Simple Sabotage Field Manual, it was called. It was essentially the precursor to the CIA developed this manual for ordinary citizens to inject inefficiencies into the enemy operations. One of those tactics that was advised in this manual, meetings. hold unproductive meetings, hold meetings that meander and detour. And that was, decades and decades ago. What was once used as a weapon of sabotage is now business as usual. And it's remarkable to think that all the changes that we've experienced in our workplace, all the new technologies, meetings continue to be largely designed, and it's usually a lack of design, as they were decades and decades ago. And so my passion is collaboration. My passion is helping organizations work better together. And in so many ways, meetings are the tip of the iceberg. Usually they're not the fundamental problem, but they're an activity that we spend more time than any other activity on. And so when we think about leverage for you as an individual, for you as a team, for you as an organization, there's nothing more impactful you could be doing in general than fixing broken meetings.
So you said two things in the book that really got me thinking. I'm going to put them together in sort of in juxtaposition, and then you can talk about them. One is, you said we treat meetings like junk drawers, which made me chuckle and continue to think. And then the second thing, you said we should be treating meetings or thinking about meetings as a product. So if you want to say something about the junk drawer thing, you can, but certainly, why do you say we should treat meetings or think of meetings as a product?
And that's the premise of the book. We know that meetings are the most important product in our entire organization. They're where decisions get made, priorities get set, culture gets built. Meetings have a significant impact, not just on organizational performance, but employee well-being. And they're highly dysfunctional. They're not optimized. And so if we are to take a product lens, there are specific design principles that we should be applying to meetings. And so each of the 7 chapters of the book walks through a product design principle applied to meetings. The junk drawer is why this is so problematic. And we all feel it, where we use meetings as a lazy substitute in so many cases for real work and real thinking. And it's human nature. Meetings are very interesting because they're highly visible in our organization. We as humans associate visibility with value. We know that when we see someone's packed calendar, when we see they're overbooked, they're double booked, that's a symbol of busyness, importance, status, value in the organization. And because of this, we also have these human tendencies to overschedule as a productivity theater mechanism, as opposed to actually moving work forward. It's a multifaceted problem, but fundamentally, it's the fact that we use meetings as a lazy substitute when really they should be intentionally designed, just as we would our products that we sell to customers.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a piece in there that you said that I want to underscore, and that is that, as you said, when we look at someone's calendar and we see all the meetings and we see they're busy, then we see that as wow, right? They're powerful, they're positional and all that stuff. The thing is, that's part of the problem in and of itself, is we've framed productivity as equal to busy, which is quite incorrect and very harmful. And if we could fix that mindset in our organizations, and the design principles we're going to get to will help you think about that. But that in itself would help us solve part of this, what I would call conundrum related to meetings.
And it's not a mystery why we do this. We know that clarity is so lacking in many, many organizations, where employees aren't sure what work they're responsible for. They're not sure how their work connects to business outcomes. When you have a lack of clarity in terms of what you're being measured by and what work truly matters, you default to the things that are most visible, and you default to those outputs versus the real outcomes. We also know that the more we speak in meetings, the more we're perceived as a leader. It's sometimes called the Babel hypothesis. And so there's also, these weird psychological tendencies that happen in meetings that influence our perception of status and leadership in the organization, that can be really harmful because often they don't actually align with true impact.
So one of the things, and you have direct experience with this, and one of the things that's, I think, maybe become I'm not sure we can say it's a trend, but it's certainly we've become more aware of it in the last few years, is the idea of no meeting Tuesdays, or pick a day, it doesn't matter. Like no meeting Fridays. We have a client that declared no meeting Fridays. And there's the best stuff I've ever read about that, including how to actually make it work, is in this book. And so I don't want to make this our whole conversation, but I do think it's worth talking about. And I just have to tell everybody that when you get Rebecca's book, one of the things she does is, if you're going to make that determination, we're not going to have meetings on Fridays or whatever day you're picking, she says, here's what you should do 4 weeks out. Here's what you should do 3 weeks out. In other words, you don't just declare them and like cancel them all. We have to move into that. And I think it's brilliant stuff. So do you want to just talk about that? Again, I don't want to make our whole conversation about that, but can you talk about that in general and maybe give some key pointers to people?
Sure. And I think there are two parts that are important here. One, the science behind why they work, and then recognizing that just because you decide you're going to have a day without meetings doesn't mean that's going to be effective. Just like having an agenda.
Or that you're not going to actually have them.
Well, exactly. If you're not going to stick to it, there needs to be a whole system around it. But the research is pretty fascinating, and I dug into this because I've experienced the benefits of no meeting days in my career, and I wanted to understand, what actually is the science behind this. And it's fascinating. There's research that has been done, in particular, a study looking at 70 companies that had implemented no meeting days. And what they essentially found was no meeting days, even one no meeting day a week. They actually recommend, the sweet spot for many reasons is 2 to 3 no meeting days. Now, that's not practical for so many organizations. And in general, we need to consider our own organization as to whether this actually makes sense. Depending on your distribution across the globe, depending on how customer facing you are, no meeting days may or may not make sense for all of your organization or part of it. But the research shows no meeting days tend to be associated with increased productivity, which is what we might expect. What maybe we won't expect necessarily is no meeting days are also associated with better cooperation within the organization, because people start to need to find better, more intentional ways to collaborate asynchronously, and that makes you a better team player in many cases, and associated with lower micromanagement, because managers no longer are using meetings as a surveillance tool to spoon feed updates from their team, get updates from their team. It becomes a much healthier environment if they're well-intentioned. Now, that said, the design matters, and understanding that ideally this is an organizational-wide effort. Even the naming matters. Probably we should be calling them Focus Wednesdays or Focus Fridays rather
what we
than
want as opposed to what we don't want, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that struck me and you just said it, and I read it in the book, the idea that the optimum from the research, the optimum number of focus days, non-meeting days, would be 2 to 3. And here's the connection I made. So comment on this if you want. And it's necessarily a bit of an oversimplification, and yet I think there may be something in here that you might want to comment on. And here it is: that most organizations are hybrid, in that people are coming to the office 2 or 3 days and not coming to the office, therefore 2 or 3 days. And I have long been talking about the fact that the days that you work in the office should be different than the days that you're not. And it seems to me that we would generally say that meetings in person are probably better than meetings virtually, although we all have virtual meetings and they can be highly effective. So it seems to me there's a connection here, right? Like the days when we're home, if we didn't have meetings on the days we were home, it would be like pre-COVID, when you worked at home for a day and you got all this stuff done because you didn't get interrupted.
It's a simplification, but in general, I agree. And what we see is hybrid work is so challenging to get right. That's why we're seeing this course correction to return to office. And largely it's because, again, hybrid work isn't designed. We assume that just giving people a prescription in terms of 2 to 3 days in the office is enough. It's not. We need to give them prescription in terms of what should they be doing in the office versus at home? My colleague Michael Arena has done some fascinating research on this topic, and distinguishing as well between heads up work versus heads down work. Meetings, heads up work, probably better to happen in the office in general. But again, it depends on the emotional intensity of the meeting too. If you're in a highly emotionally charged meeting, if you're trying to persuade someone or delivering hard feedback, be in the office. But if it's more, you're deciding on something, you're discussing something less emotionally charged, you can get away with having a virtual or hybrid meeting,
100%.
especially if the schedules make for that to be logistically
Yeah.
easier as well. The design around this is the key.
And that's a perfect segue, because the book is, as you already said, built around these 7 design principles that aren't just about meetings, but you're framing meetings around these same principles. It's the subtitle of the book, 7 Principles for Designing Meetings. And your point a second ago is we could call it a mic drop, because if people just thought about that statement that you made, hybrid work isn't designed.
Mhm.
I know we're not talking about hybrid work, we're talking about meetings. That statement is profoundly true and has profound implications for all of us,
Mhm.
for
And
sure.
so much of this is contagion and what we've defaulted to as business as usual. We're seeing this with AI as well. Just because you implement the technology is not magically going to transform your organization for better or worse. It's about how we design, how we show up, how we think about the broader organizational structure. There's a chapter in the book on systems thinking and how important that is. In general, meetings aren't the fundamental problem. Usually it's a symptom of a bigger problem, and that is a broken communication system. And we see this with hybrid, perhaps most extensively, in terms of if your employees don't have clarity in terms of when they should use Slack, when they should use email versus when they should use a meeting, they're going to default to meetings. And it's such a simple switch. You as an organizational leader or a team leader, giving your employees clarity. And I encourage, the folks listening or watching, ask 4 of your employees what deserves to be a meeting in our organization. If you're getting more than one different answer, it's a sign your communication system isn't working for the people who matter.
Yeah. The one of the many good things that came out of COVID, and there are many, and obviously not everything was good about COVID for
Mhm.
sure, but one of the good things is it got us, at least gave us the thought to think about which communication medium should we be using, because we had so many more to use, right?
Mhm.
And I think that, and I've been advocating for that very point for a very long time, and meetings being one of those. When do you Slack? When do you email? When do you voice? When do you call? Maybe we should actually call on the phone sometimes too. Like all of that is a really, really important thing, for sure. Now you got 7 principles. We're not going to get to all of them.
Mhm.
Um, People are going to have to get a copy of the book. I'm talking with Rebecca Hinds, the author of, for those of you watching live, it isn't even out yet. You'll have to pre-order it. But later, of course, you can get your copy of Your Best Meeting Ever, and you absolutely should do that. 7 principles. The first principle is about volume. And one of the interesting phrases that you bring to the table is the idea of meeting debt. What do
Mhm.
you mean by meeting debt?
It's something we all have experienced, if not are experiencing right now. The new year is often when we are most aware of it. Those legacy meetings that build up over time, our calendar that was made for a different era of work than we're currently in. Just as we have technical debt in products, we have meeting debt in our calendars, in the sense of all of these antiquated shortcuts, recurring meetings that have built up over time that no longer serve us. We go through the motions, we show up day after day, week after week, but our calendar isn't working for us.
We've all got that, right? And we've already talked about volume, and maybe we change volume by having a day when we don't have meetings and all
Mhm.
those sorts of things. But one of the practical things that I wanted you to talk about, and I'm afraid I'm going to sneeze here.
Oh no,
Excuse me.
bless you.
Um, One of the practical things that you talk about, is the idea of, okay, if we're going to try to have fewer meetings, And what can we do as individuals about having fewer meetings is we have to be comfortable with and able to defend our time. That's how you
Mhm.
phrase it. So how can you help? Give us some advice, because there are people listening here who say, okay, I could talk about this about my meetings, but a lot of the meetings on my calendar are not mine. Like, I'm just there, right?
Mhm.
Even if I've a leader relatively high in the organization, a lot of meetings just show up on my calendar.
Mhm.
Give us some advice on how to defend our time from those meetings.
Yes, and there are several strategies that I unpack in the book. This is highly, highly dependent on the level of psychological safety within the organization. Depending on how safe the environment you're in is, you can and you should use different strategies to push back on bad or fewer meetings. By and far, the best thing organizations can do if they're suffering from meeting debt is do what I call a meeting doomsday. So this is a 48-hour cleanse where employees delete their recurring meetings for 48 hours. And the book walks through step by step 4 weeks prior, what exactly do you do to set it up for success? But the key is employees should be in the driver's seat. So often I see these organizations do meeting cleanses top down. A bot will come in and swoop the meetings off of employees' calendars. That works, temporary relief, but it doesn't encourage these long-term changes. Employees don't feel bought in. You don't trigger that IKEA effect where if people build something themselves, they feel more connected to it and value it more and stick to it. So that's the best case. But even as an individual, if your team or organization isn't ready for a doomsday, pushing back on bad meetings should be normal. That should be explicit in the meeting guidelines. Managers should have those conversations with employees. If not, the organization should be giving employees scripts to push back. I recommend in the book, if you do operate in a very low psychologically safe environment, leading with curiosity, framing your pushback as a question. And this has come from great research from Amy Edmondson and colleagues, as opposed to an assertion, tends
Yeah.
to help.
Yeah.
So I noticed that this meeting is going off the rails. Is there a way we could move it back on track? Or I noticed that we spend half the meeting on status updates and rarely get to the real decision. Is there a way we could do things better? Increasingly, I'm seeing a role and an important role for technology to play. And so I've worked with multiple companies at this point on how can we use technology to deflect the blame away from the individual. So for example, if you've scheduled a meeting that doesn't have an agenda, where it's a type of meeting that should have an agenda, auto canceling the
Which is
meeting.
most, by the way,
Mhm.
nearly
Mhm.
all, by the way.
Nearly all, or they're reused, recycled
Yeah,
from the
exactly.
last one, as
Yeah,
my
exactly.
my colleague Stephen Rogelberg has found. That can be effective as well in
For
terms
sure.
of again giving people more permission to cancel the meetings in a way that doesn't feel personal. If you're over scheduling, I've worked with organizations where if the attendee list goes beyond 8, the meeting is, you're given a pop-up. Do you really want to add that 8th person? Because we know that's when social loafing really kicks in. That's when multitasking really kicks in, and increasingly AI as well. So using AI to measure the effectiveness of your meeting. There's a whole chapter in the book on metrics that again enables you to deflect the blame to a objective or perceived objective technology where it's not the fearful employee trying to push back. But ideally we should be building safe environments where pushing back on bad meetings is normal and expected.
And even expected, but even rewarded, if you will, right?
Rewarded.
So you mentioned metrics. One of the design principles is measures, and let's talk a little bit about the right metrics to use to help us see how effective our meetings are or how effective they could be.
Mhm. So there are two big components of this. One, and this is a metric I learned from one of my great colleagues, Elise Keith, called return on time investment. So just
Elise has been on the show, everybody. We'll put Elise in the show notes.
she's wonderful and helped me a lot think through the metrics chapter of the book in particular. we can think about the analogy in the product development world, and that would be return on investment, right? We measure that down to dollar and cents for our products. We don't often measure our meetings. And so return on time investment, after about 10% of the meetings you organize, anonymously ask attendees on a scale of 0 to 5, was this meeting worth the time you invested? It does a couple things. One of the big important shifts that it helps enable is it gets you out of this meeting suck reflex, where we know if you ask people how effective are your meetings, you're going to trigger that meeting suck reflex. Where if you ask people to rate alongside their time or in relation to the value of their time, you tend to get a less biased answer because everyone does have an intuitive sense of the value of their time. That qualitative feedback from employees, Elise and I both recommend as a follow-up ask, what could I do as the organizer that would enable you to boost your rating by 1 point? So you're getting some actionable feedback as well, but then pair that metric with analytics that these days almost every meeting technology offers. If you're in person, you can bring the computer screen in to help you with some of these analytics. Some are better than others, but we can have a pretty good sense of how effective a meeting is looking at punctuality rates, multitasking rates, engagement in the meeting, airtime distribution, huge differences in terms of, we know equal airtime is one of the biggest predictors of team performance, and yet so often it's skewed in meetings. We talked about the Babel hypothesis earlier. So it's a multi-metric activity in the best cases, but the key is pairing the qualitative with some of the quantitative objective data from your meeting platform.
For sure. There are so many things that I would love for us to have the chance to talk about, Rebecca. But and so if I'm picking one more, here's what it's going to be. One of the ways to have our best meetings is to sometimes not even meet. Yeah, we talked about not having meetings and all that sort of stuff. But one thing that I think it's worth us highlighting for a second, and this is more possible now than ever, and that is the idea of how do we lean into asynchronous collaboration rather than collaboration equals meeting.
Yes, and it's, we don't have time to go through all the components of it, but it starts simply. It starts with laying out your communication tools as an organization and the purpose of each one, including a meeting. I recommend in the book what I call the 4D CEO test, which is a 2-part test to decide whether you need a meeting. The first part of the test is essentially a meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide, discuss, debate, or develop yourself or your team. There's a second part test that's important as well. But giving employees that clarity, that's step one. The second step that organizations often overlook as well is, in order for you to have fewer meetings, you need to have a communication culture that enables that. You don't just need the tools, you need the culture. And that means strong written communication norms, clear communication norms as well, a culture of transparency. All of these things enable employees to self-serve information themselves in a way that they can rely less on that synchronous, expensive meeting to exchange information or get or give information.
I love that. So I said there's plenty more that we could have talked about, plenty more I would like to have talked about. But is there anything, sort of as this conversation has unfolded, that you wish I would have asked or that you'd like to add before we sort of go into the final part of this conversation?
No, I think we covered a lot of bases. There's a reason why I named the book Your Best Meeting Ever and a positive promise as opposed to a negative promise. I was, torn between the two, and I landed on a positive promise because I truly believe this is possible for every organization. And I truly believe that it's the highest leverage thing you can do, especially as an individual. There's few things that differentiate us more in our organizations than our ability to design and run good meetings. the natural next step is you can run a meeting, you can probably run a team, you can probably run a function, maybe you can run the organization, whereas the opposite is also true. If you can't run a meeting, if you can't steer a meeting back on track, gosh, I don't want you running a team or a function or even a project. We associate good meeting hygiene with leadership, and that's what we should be striving for.
And it's also important for us to know that, we all are here listening as a leader, as a team member, and we probably find ourselves in other situations outside of our workplace where we could use all of these same, like, not probably, we could absolutely use these same ideas in our communities, in our families, in all of those other, in our churches and all those other sorts of things. And you're nodding, so you're in agreement with me there.
Absolutely. And I was a competitive swimmer for a long time. And a lot of my inspiration for designing great team environments has come from the pool deck, because, those types of interactions, those types of meetings should similarly be, highly structured in a way that's going to get the best out of your people, your team.
So a couple of more things before we go, a couple of questions that I pretty much always ask. And one of them is, and you just mentioned swimming. So what do you do, Rebecca, for fun?
So swimming, I love to stay active. I love to read. I love to write. And increasingly, I love to write in a completely AI and an environment completely removed from AI. I think that human writing is so fun and generative. Love farmers markets. I live in the Bay Area, so I love exploring different farmers markets as well.
And since you mentioned it, you knew I was going to ask you this. What are you reading?
So lately, I've been going back to my old master's syllabus and looking at research around the history of technology, because what we're seeing right now, my other big passion is AI and understanding why are we seeing what we're seeing in terms of the failures of AI implementation. And we can learn a lot from the past history of technology. Technology rarely fails because it's not powerful. It fails because humans resist change. And so I have a collection of great researchers I turn to time and time again. Steve Barley, Wanda Orlikowski is another one. Steve in particular did great research early on the CT scanner. And I continue to think that we can learn a lot from his early research in terms of why people resist technology, why the implementation doesn't go as we expect, and apply it to what we're seeing right now with AI.
There's so much wisdom there, because you can even go back and read things that were written about what was going to happen when all these trains were everywhere. Yeah. And you could take out the things that say stuff about rails, and you can say it's the same stuff that people are saying now about AI, and like, how could they be anything alike except the fact that it's new?
Well, even dating back to the pen, right? The pen, we were fearful of forgetting things, and the printing press, the steam engine, all. And why I like the academic research is it's rigorous, it's often qualitative. You're truly understanding, within an organization, all the things that change in a way that I think we need to. Again, it's about intentionality. It's about how we think about the human piece and not just the technology piece.
Before we go, the question you most wanted me to ask, but I haven't, is how can people connect with you? Where do you want them to go? And I'll hold up the book for those watching while you're doing that.
Thank you. So the book, pre-orders matter a lot. It's on Amazon. It's on your favorite bookstore. My website's RebeccaHinds.com, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Rebecca Hinds, that's with a D.com. You want to make sure you go there. And you do want to make sure you get your copy of Your Best Meeting Ever, 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. I'm having this conversation, for those of you on the podcast that aren't hearing this till at least the end of March. We're having this conversation on the 15th of January. And I, because of the show, among other things, I read a lot of books. I'm confident that this book has the chance to be one of the most valuable ones that you read this year. Go get your copy. Now, before we go, I have to ask all of you who are listening the question that I always ask you, which is, now what? Like there was plenty of things here. Like don't just listen and say, yeah, that was good. Go act on something, try something, do something. And the question is, what are you going to choose? Like, what will you do with what you heard? Because until you make that determination and take that step, this will have been less valuable by far than it could have been. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to spend time with you. Not just your wisdom and your insight, but your countenance is wonderful. And I've enjoyed our time a great deal.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. I've loved this as well.
So everybody, if you loved it as much as we did, you need to make sure you come back next week, right? So if this is your first time, don't make it your last time, which means hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching. So you make sure you come or listening. So you make sure you come back and tell someone else to do it as well, because next week we'll be back with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. And we'll see you then.